I kicked my mother-in-law out after finding my hidden inheritance gone. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I watched my wife's mother claw at the heavy oak door, but I had already changed the locks. Beatrice stood on our driveway, her designer luggage scattered across the wet concrete, screaming that I was a monster. Rain matted her perfectly highlighted hair, but I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. I just stood in the entryway, my hand resting on the cool brass deadbolt, breathing steadily for the first time in 6 months. How do you look at the woman eating at your table, knowing she robbed your past? You don't. You pack her trash and you throw her out. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, though the dollar value was staggering. It was about the violation of my sanctuary. Beatrice had played the frail, bankrupt victim flawlessly, conning her own daughter into letting her sleep down the hall from us. Meanwhile, she was quietly dismantling my family's legacy. My grandfather's antique cedar chest, tucked away in the locked home office, had been gutted. The heavy canvas pouches of pre-1933 gold double eagles, the weight of them slipping through my fingers when my grandfather first showed them to me, gone. The 1969 Omega Speedmaster he wore every single day, the scratched glass carrying decades of his life, gone. She took pieces of my bloodline and traded them like cheap trinkets. My wife, Emma, stood behind me in the hallway, her face pale, trembling as the reality of her mother's true nature finally shattered the lifelong illusion she had held. Emma had begged me to let Beatrice stay, insisting that family takes care of family. I trusted my wife, and by extension, I tolerated her mother. That blind trust cost me the only tangible memories I had left of the man who raised me. The heavy silence in our house was punctuated only by Beatrice's muffled shrieks through the thick glass. I felt a cold, methodical calm wash over me. I wasn't the same man who had reluctantly carried those bags inside half a year ago. The grief of losing my grandfather had been violently overwritten by the sheer panic of discovering the theft, which then hardened into a sharp, calculated fury. I had played the detective in my own home, gathering the receipts, tracking the cash, and watching the mask slip from the parasite draining my life. She thought I was just a quiet, oblivious son-in-law who would swallow his pride to keep the peace. She was about to learn exactly how ruthless a quiet man could be when pushed. It started exactly 6 months ago on a dreary Tuesday evening. Beatrice arrived on our porch with 4 enormous suitcases and a rehearsed sob story. She collapsed into Emma's arms, weeping about how the bank had ruthlessly foreclosed on her townhouse, claiming her late husband's hidden debts had utterly bankrupted her overnight. She swore she was completely destitute, without a single dollar to her name. Emma, eager to please her fiercely critical mother and trusting to an absolute fault, didn't hesitate for a second. She's family, Chris. Emma pleaded with me in the kitchen, her eyes brimming with tears. We have the guest room. We can't just let her live on the streets. It's only temporary, just until she gets back on her feet. I hated the idea. From the moment Beatrice crossed the threshold, the dynamic of our quiet home shifted drastically. The boundary stomping was immediate and relentless. She criticized the groceries I bought, the way I loaded the dishwasher, and the hours I worked. She rearranged the living room furniture while we were at our jobs, claiming the feng shui was giving her migraines. You really should be earning more at your age, Christopher, she'd sneer over breakfast, sipping the expensive organic coffee I paid for. Emma deserves a lifestyle, not just a life. I swallowed my anger every single time, biting my tongue until it bled, purely for Emma's sake. I tried to be the supportive husband. I paid for Beatrice's meals, her pharmacy runs, and even her premium cable package, believing the lie that she was a helpless, grieving widow trying to survive a financial catastrophe. But there were subtle, nagging inconsistencies. A supposedly penniless woman who required weekly manicures. A bankrupt widow who refused to eat anything but premium cuts of meat. I brushed these red flags aside, rationalizing that old habits die hard, especially for someone accustomed to comfort. I wanted to keep the peace in my marriage, so I focused on my work and retreated to my locked home office whenever the tension became too suffocating. That office was my only true sanctuary, the one room in the house where her toxic presence wasn't allowed to permeate. It was also the room that held the most valuable and secretive piece of my entire existence. I thought the heavy brass lock on the door was enough to protect my private world from her prying eyes. I severely underestimated the desperate greed of the woman sleeping just down the hall. Inside my office, shoved beneath a heavy oak bookshelf, sat my late grandfather's antique cedar chest. To anyone else, it looked like a scuffed, forgotten piece of vintage furniture, barely worth $50 at a local estate sale. But my grandfather was a man who didn't trust banks, a hardened survivor of harsh economic times who believed true wealth was something you could hold in your bare hands. Before he passed away, he pulled me aside and handed me a small, ornate iron key. He showed me the false bottom, a seamlessly integrated hidden compartment that released only if you pressed a specific knot in the wood while turning the key. Inside rested his entire life savings, bypassed from the probate courts and greedy relatives. It was a staggering collection. There were velvet pouches heavy with pure gold, dozens of 1-ounce Krugerrands, and vintage American double eagles. Beside the gold lay a custom mahogany display case holding his pride and joy, a collection of rare, vintage mechanical watches. There was the 1969 Omega Speedmaster, a flawless 1970s Rolex Submariner with a faded ghost bezel, and a pristine Patek Philippe Calatrava he had won in a high-stakes poker game decades ago. The sheer weight of the gold and the intricate craftsmanship of those timepieces represented my safety net, my future children's college fund, and the unbreakable bond one shared with the only man who truly understood me. I kept it entirely off the books. I didn't even tell Emma the full extent of the hoard, not out of malice, but out of caution. Emma had a notoriously bad habit of oversharing family business with her mother. I knew that if Beatrice caught wind of untraceable, liquid assets sitting under our roof, the relentless guilt trips and demands for loans would never end. It was my secret burden and my greatest comfort. Sometimes, after a brutally exhausting day dealing with Beatrice's endless complaints and passive-aggressive jabs, I would lock the office door, open the hidden compartment, and just hold the submariner. The rhythmic, sweeping tick of the mechanical movement was a grounding force, a reminder of my grandfather's steady presence in a house that increasingly felt like a hostile war zone. I felt completely secure in my own home. That profound sense of absolute security was about to be violently and permanently shattered. Our 5th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to do something unforgettable for Emma. Despite the suffocating tension Beatrice brought into our home, my wife and I had managed to keep our connection alive. I decided it was finally time to liquidate one of the smaller, duplicate gold coins to fund a romantic, desperately needed weekend getaway to a secluded cabin in the mountains. I waited until Tuesday afternoon. Beatrice was supposedly out attending a free community grief support group, and Emma was stuck at the corporate office until 6. The house was dead quiet. I walked into my office, locked the door behind me out of sheer habit, and knelt beside the antique cedar chest. I reached under the bookshelf for the ornate iron key, my fingers brushing against the familiar cold metal. But as I slid the key into the brass mechanism, my heart suddenly skipped a heavy beat. The key didn't catch. The internal tumblers felt loose, grinding with a sickening, metallic crunch. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I pressed the wooden knot and yanked the false bottom upward. The panel splintered slightly, giving way with unnatural ease. I stared into the dark recess of the hidden compartment, my breath catching in my throat, my mind desperately trying to reject the visual information my eyes were processing. The velvet pouches were gone. The custom mahogany watch case was gone. The heavy, comforting weight of my grandfather's legacy had been completely hollowed out, leaving behind nothing but bare cedar wood and a single, mocking dust bunny. I dropped to my knees, frantically tearing apart the rest of the chest, throwing old documents and photographs across the floor in a state of absolute, blinding terror. I checked my pockets, the bookshelf, the floorboards, nothing. The raw panic morphed into an immediate, suffocating dread. My grandfather's life, his sweat, his secrets, the Rolex, the Omega, the heavy gold coins, all of it vanished into thin air. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as my eyes darted to the office window. The screen was perfectly intact. The heavy deadbolt on my office door had been locked when I entered. This wasn't a random smash and grab by a desperate street junkie who somehow bypassed our security system. The thief had a key to my house, and they knew exactly where to look. When Emma finally walked through the front door, the exhaustion of her workday visibly clinging to her, I didn't hesitate. I pulled her straight into the master bedroom, my hands shaking so violently I could barely lock the door. I confessed everything: the secret inheritance, the hidden compartment, the vintage watches, the gold, and the devastating, hollow reality of the empty cedar chest. Emma's eyes widened in shock, her hands flying to her mouth as she tried to process the magnitude of the loss and the secret I had kept from her. Before we could even form a coherent plan, a sharp knock rattled the bedroom door. Beatrice pushed her way in without waiting for an answer, holding a cup of herbal tea and wearing an expression of deeply rehearsed concern. "Whatever is the matter? You both look like you've seen a ghost," she cooed, her eyes darting between us. I felt a surge of pure adrenaline. I bluntly told her that thousands of dollars in family heirlooms had been stolen from my locked office. Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her pearls in a display of theatrical horror that belonged on a daytime soap opera. "Oh, Christopher, that is simply dreadful," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with fake sympathy. "But are you entirely sure you didn't just misplace them? You've been so incredibly stressed and forgetful lately." My jaw clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. When I firmly insisted that gold bars don't just walk out of locked chests, Beatrice quickly pivoted her narrative. "Well, what about that shady HVAC contractor who came to fix the vents last month? I told you he had shifty eyes. He must have snooped around while we were eating lunch." Emma, desperate for a logical explanation that didn't destroy her worldview, latched onto the lie instantly. "She's right, Chris. That guy was left alone upstairs for over an hour. We have to file a police report immediately against him." I stared at my wife, feeling a massive, invisible chasm opening up between us. The contractor hadn't even been in my office, and the door was locked. The gaslighting was so smooth, so utterly practiced. She was sowing seeds of doubt directly into my marriage. I realized right then that fighting her with logic would only make me sound crazy. 3 agonizing weeks dragged by. The police took a report, politely dusted the splintered cedar for prints, and essentially told me that without serial numbers or a camera, the vintage watches and gold were completely untraceable ghosts in the system. The tension inside our house became thick enough to choke on. Beatrice continued to play the frail, traumatized victim, audibly sighing about how unsafe she felt in our home now that burglars were targeting the neighborhood. Meanwhile, I was losing my mind, analyzing every single movement she made, watching her like a hawk from the shadows. How do you look at the woman eating at your table, knowing she robbed your past? You don't. You just wait for the inevitable mistake. Criminals who think they are smarter than everyone else always get sloppy, and Beatrice was fueled by an intoxicating blend of arrogance and greed. The breakthrough happened on a brisk Sunday morning. Beatrice had dramatically complained about a broken zipper on her heavy winter coat and tossed it into the hallway donation bin, demanding Emma buy her a new one. I was gathering the bags to take to the charity drop-off when I felt something stiff crinkle inside the discarded coat's silk-lined pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slipped my fingers inside and pulled out a thick, glossy piece of cardstock. It wasn't just a business card. It was a formal appraisal receipt from Crown and Caliber Vintage Horology, an ultra-high-end watch dealer and pawnbroker located 3 towns over, nestled in the wealthy financial district. The date on the receipt was stamped exactly 2 days before I discovered the chest empty. My eyes locked onto the handwritten ink scrawled across the bottom line. Appraisal for 1970s Rolex Submariner, ghost bezel. Cash offer accepted. There was no dollar amount listed, but the specific description of my grandfather's watch was an undeniable smoking gun. The oxygen vanished from the hallway. My hands shook as I took a clear picture of the receipt with my phone, my blood turning to absolute ice as the pieces connected. She didn't just steal my family's legacy. She practically left a map to the crime scene. I couldn't go to the police with just a discarded business card. Beatrice would simply lie, claiming she found it on the street or that I planted it to frame her. I needed concrete, irrefutable proof that would shatter her carefully constructed facade and force Emma to see the monster lurking in our guest room. I immediately called Marcus, my fiercely loyal best friend since college. Marcus works as a senior claims adjuster for a massive insurance firm. Investigating fraud and verifying high-end appraisals is literally what he does for a living. We met in the back corner of a dimly lit diner, far away from my house. I showed him the photo of the receipt, my hands still trembling with suppressed rage. She fenced it, Marcus. She took my grandfather's life's work and sold it for quick cash. I whispered, the reality finally setting in completely. Marcus examined the photo, his jaw tightening. Crown and Caliber is notoriously strict, he said, tapping the screen. They require government ID, thumbprints, and multiple signatures for any cash payout over $1,000. If she sold it there is a massive paper trail. We formed a quiet, methodical plan. Marcus used his professional credentials to contact the dealer, framing the inquiry as an active insurance investigation regarding stolen property. While he dug through the financial dirt, I had to return to my house and continue playing the role of the defeated, oblivious husband. It was psychological torture. I sat across from Beatrice at the dinner table that evening, watching her delicately cut her steak, her eyes full of fake sympathy as she asked if the police had found any leads on the terrible burglars. I forced myself to smile, to nod, to chew my food while sitting mere inches from the absolute thief. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost haunting the very halls I paid the mortgage on. The urge to flip the table and scream the truth in her face was almost overwhelming, but I knew I had to maintain the element of total surprise. If I tipped my hand even a fraction of an inch, she would destroy the evidence. 2 days later, my phone vibrated in my pocket with a heavily encrypted message from Marcus. We met in an empty parking garage after I finished my shift. Marcus looked absolutely sick to his stomach as he pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "Chris, it's worse than we thought," he said, handing me the documents. I opened the folder, and the sickening truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just the Rolex Submariner. Beatrice had methodically fenced nearly the entire inheritance over a period of 3 weeks, making multiple trips to different high-end buyers to avoid raising red flags. The dates on the pawn receipts matched perfectly with the afternoons Emma was at the office and I was running errands. The sheer volume of the betrayal was quantified in stark black ink: the Patek Philippe, the vintage Omega, and over 30 ounces of the gold double eagles. The total cash payout was a staggering 6 figures. But the most horrifying part wasn't the sale, it was what she did with the blood money. Marcus had traced the wire transfers from the pawnbrokers. Beatrice, the woman who wept on our porch claiming she couldn't afford a loaf of bread, hadn't used the money to pay off her supposedly crippling debts. Instead, she had aggressively wired the funds to a luxury real estate development firm in Florida. She had secretly put down a massive, non-refundable cash deposit on a premium, oceanfront retirement condo in Boca Raton. Furthermore, she had prepaid for a 3-week, first-class Mediterranean cruise scheduled to depart next month. She was actively using my grandfather's sweat and sacrifice to fund a lavish, secret lifestyle, all while living rent-free in my house, eating my food, and gaslighting my wife into believing she was a helpless victim of circumstance. My vision actually blurred at the edges as the raw, unfiltered malice of her actions fully crystallized in my mind. She was going to bleed us completely dry, secure her luxury escape, and then simply vanish into the sunset without a single look back. She thought she had pulled off the perfect crime, completely blind to my trap. Armed with Marcus's devastating financial dossier, I returned home to find the house buzzing with an unnatural, manic energy. Beatrice was standing in the kitchen, dramatically clutching a piece of paper and wiping away fake tears of overwhelming joy. Emma was hugging her tightly, looking at me with a radiant smile that absolutely shattered my heart. "Chris, you won't believe it," Emma cried out as I walked in. "Mom's lawyer just called. A miracle happened. A state hardship grant she applied for months ago finally came through. It's enough for her to start over." Beatrice looked at me, her eyes gleaming with a sickening, triumphant malice disguised as maternal gratitude. "I'll be able to move out by the end of the month, Christopher," she purred, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "I know I've been a terrible burden on you both. I'll be out of your hair before you know it." The sheer audacity of her lie made my blood run entirely cold. There was no hardship grant. There was no miracle. She was accelerating her timeline because the Florida condo closing date was rapidly approaching, and she needed to escape before the dust settled. The clock was suddenly ticking violently in my ears. If she walked out that door with the remaining cash hidden in her offshore accounts, I would never see my grandfather's legacy again, and Emma would spend the rest of her life believing her mother was a saint who simply caught a lucky break. I couldn't just confront her with the paperwork. She would claim the documents were forged, scream abuse, and use Emma as a human shield to make her escape. I needed her to confess. I needed to trap her in a lie so profound, so visually undeniable, that even my deeply trusting wife couldn't look away from the ugly truth. I retreated to my office, my mind racing through dozens of scenarios, until a dark, brilliant plan began to firmly form in my head. I was going to use her insatiable, bottomless greed strictly against her to end this nightmare. To catch a rat fleeing a sinking ship, you must offer it bigger cheese. The very next morning, I called in sick to work. The moment Emma and Beatrice left the house, Emma to her office, and Beatrice supposedly to meet with the grant administrators, I sprang into frantic action. I drove to a specialized electronics store and purchased 3 high-definition, motion-activated hidden nanny cameras. They were incredibly small, designed to look like ordinary household objects: an alarm clock, a USB wall charger, and a smoke detector. I spent 2 hours meticulously installing them. I placed one in the main hallway, one explicitly covering the guest room door, and the most crucial one directly inside my locked office, angled perfectly to capture the antique cedar chest and my desk. Now, I needed the bait. I called Marcus and had him rush over with a prop. We took a heavy, velvet jewelry box, the exact kind my grandfather used, and filled it with cheap, heavy steel washers to simulate the weight of solid gold coins. On top of the washers, I placed a highly realistic, counterfeit vintage watch that Marcus sourced from a theatrical prop house. I deliberately broke the lock on my office door just enough to make it look like it hadn't latched properly. Then, I placed the velvet box halfway out of the bottom drawer of my desk, practically screaming to be discovered. To seal the trap, I printed a fake, highly official-looking appraisal document indicating that this second stash of newly discovered rare coins was worth upwards of $80,000, leaving it resting right next to the box. I knew Beatrice couldn't resist. Her greed was a terminal disease. She believed she had already gotten away with the first heist flawlessly, which meant she was feeling utterly invincible. The trap was set, the cameras were fully synced to a secure cloud server on my phone, and all I had to do was step back and wait for the predator to blindly walk directly into the snare. I locked the front door behind Marcus and went to work, waiting for the digital alarm. My phone pinged 48 hours later, signaling the trap had finally been sprung. I was sitting in my cubicle at work when the high-priority alert flashed across my phone screen. Motion detected, office camera 1. I ducked into a vacant conference room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and opened the live video feed. The high-definition stream was absolutely flawless. There, in crisp 1080p color, was Beatrice. She had clearly pushed the slightly ajar door open and was creeping into my sanctuary. I watched, thoroughly disgusted, as the frail, supposedly exhausted widow moved with the rapid, practiced efficiency of a seasoned cat burglar. She immediately gravitated toward the desk. The camera captured her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated greed as she spotted the fake appraisal document. I watched her lips move as she silently read the $80,000 figure. She grabbed the velvet box, her hands shaking slightly as she felt the heavy weight of the steel washers inside. She didn't even bother to open it to verify the contents. The appraisal sheet was all the confirmation her greedy mind needed. She swiftly shoved the heavy box and the forged document deep into her oversized designer tote bag, spun on her heels, and practically sprinted out of the room. I hit the save button, securely backing up the video file to 3 different remote servers. I leaned back in the conference room chair, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. I finally had her. I had the irrefutable financial paper trail from Marcus proving she fenced the real heirlooms, the wire transfer documents showing her luxury condo purchase, and now, crystal clear, indisputable video evidence of her stealing what she believed was my remaining life savings. The airtight case was fully assembled. There was no more room for gaslighting, no more tears, and no more fake hardship grants. The illusion was entirely dead. It was time to execute the final phase of the plan and force my wife to see the monster standing right behind her. I packed my desk, knowing my house would soon become an active war zone. I waited until Friday evening to light the match. I wanted Emma to be relaxed, to ensure the shockwave would have maximum impact. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. Emma was sipping wine, and Beatrice was aggressively browsing luxury furniture catalogs on her tablet, undoubtedly picking out decor for her secret Florida condo. "Emma, I need you to sit down and just listen. Do not interrupt me," I said, my voice dangerously calm and authoritative. Emma looked up, startled by my tone. Beatrice's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. I walked over to the smart TV and mirrored my phone screen to it. "Mom's grant money is so wonderful, Chris. We should celebrate." Emma started nervously. I ignored her. "There is no grant money, Emma," I said, pulling the thick manila folder from my jacket and dropping it onto the coffee table with a heavy thud. "Your mother is not bankrupt. She is a thief." Beatrice immediately gasped, jumping to her feet. "How dare you speak to me like?" I cut her off by pressing play on my phone. The 65-inch screen instantly illuminated with the hidden camera footage. The crisp video played in total silence, showing Beatrice creeping into my office, reading the fake appraisal, and shoving the velvet box into her bag. Emma let out a choked, horrifying gasp, her hands flying to her face. I didn't stop there. I rapidly flipped through the slide deck I had prepared. I projected the pawnbroker receipts with her forged signatures, the wire transfer logs, and the contract for the luxury Boca Raton condo, detailing the exact dollar amount stolen from my grandfather's chest. "She didn't just rob me," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room, staring directly at Emma's weeping face. "She fenced my family's legacy to buy an oceanfront condo, while making you buy her groceries because she claimed she was starving." The mountain of irrefutable evidence sat suffocatingly heavy in the space between us, destroying every lie she ever told. The frail, crying victim act vanished instantly, replaced by something incredibly dark and viciously real. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. Beatrice stared at the television screen displaying her signature on the luxury condo contract, trapped entirely in the blinding headlights of the truth. Then, the most terrifying transformation I have ever witnessed occurred. The hunched, trembling posture vanished. Beatrice straightened her spine, her face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly contempt. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She went on the offensive. "You arrogant, ungrateful little prick," she spat, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous snarl that I had never heard before. "You had hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting in a dusty wooden box. You didn't even need it. My daughter deserves a better life, and I deserve to retire in absolute comfort after dealing with my deadbeat husband for 30 years. Emma let out a shattered, agonizing sob, curling into a tight ball on the sofa. "Mom, how could you? He took you in. We fed you." Beatrice sneered at her own daughter, the absolute lack of empathy chilling my blood. "Oh, grow up, Emma. The world runs on money, not your pathetic, naive sentimentality. I took what was necessary to secure my future. Christopher is a selfish hoarder who kept secrets from his own wife. I did you a massive favor by exposing his lies." She was actively trying to spin her felony grand larceny into a twisted act of maternal protection. The sheer, narcissistic delusion was breathtaking. She firmly believed she was entitled to my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears simply because she existed and wanted a better view of the ocean. I watched Emma's spirit completely break in real time. The mother she had fiercely defended, the woman she had blindly trusted and prioritized over my own comfort, was standing in our living room proudly boasting about destroying our lives. The protective, loving facade had been violently ripped away, leaving only a greedy, venomous parasite staring back at us. I stepped forward, the time for talking and presenting evidence officially over. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your garbage and get out of my house," I said, my voice vibrating with a terrifying, icy calm. Beatrice scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. "You can't legally kick me out of here. I have established tenant rights. I'll call the police on you." I pulled my phone out and dialed 911, keeping my thumb hovering right over the bright green call button. "Please, do it," I challenged her, stepping directly into her personal space. "Let's get the police here right now. I will hand them the pawn receipts, the wire fraud documents, and the high-definition video of you committing grand larceny in my home." You won't be going to Boca Raton, Beatrice. You will be going to a state penitentiary for the next 10 years. Your choice. Pack, or I press call. The blood completely drained from her face. The realization that she was entirely cornered finally struck her. She scrambled down the hallway, frantically throwing her designer clothes into her heavy suitcases with violently shaking hands. Emma didn't move a single muscle to help her. My wife just sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, completely hollowed out by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Exactly 55 minutes later, I grabbed Beatrice's heavy suitcases and dragged them out the front door, hurling them aggressively onto the wet concrete of the driveway. Listen to me very carefully, I told her, standing in the doorway. You have exactly 48 hours to wire every single cent of that money back into my account, or I take this entire folder straight to the district attorney. I will absolutely destroy whatever miserable life you have left. I didn't wait for her pathetic, venomous response. I slammed the heavy oak door shut, immediately turned the deadbolt, and began installing the new locks I had purchased that afternoon. The silence that fell over the house wasn't the peaceful quiet I had desperately craved. It was the deafening, traumatic silence of a massive bomb detonating. The cancer was finally removed from our home, but the bleeding had only just begun. The 48-hour deadline came and went without a single wire transfer. Beatrice arrogantly assumed I wouldn't actually pull the trigger and destroy Emma's mother. She was dead wrong. On Monday morning, Marcus and I walked straight into the district attorney's office and handed over the meticulously organized mountain of evidence. The authorities moved with terrifying speed once they saw the undeniable paper trail and the video footage. The funds for the Boca Raton condo were immediately frozen pending a massive criminal fraud investigation, and a warrant was officially issued for Beatrice's arrest. I don't know where she is hiding right now, and frankly, I don't care. Let the legal system grind her into absolute dust. The hardest part of this entire nightmare hasn't been dealing with the police or lawyers. It has been watching my wife try to piece her shattered reality back together. Emma is currently in intensive weekly therapy, grappling with the agonizing fact that the mother she loved unconditionally viewed her as nothing more than a convenient human shield for a financial heist. Our marriage survived the explosion, but the structural damage is profound and will take years of brutal, honest work to repair. We are slowly learning how to communicate again without the suffocating ghost of her mother standing between us. As for my grandfather's legacy, the authorities managed to recover the vintage Patek Philippe and roughly half of the gold double eagles before they were permanently lost to the black market. The Rolex Submariner is gone. I still sit in my locked office sometimes, staring at the repaired cedar chest, feeling the heavy absence of the things that were stolen from me. But I learned a brutal, invaluable lesson about the dangerous illusion of blind loyalty. Toxic people don't magically become saints just because they share your DNA or marry into your family tree. Trust your gut, protect your sanctuary at all costs, and never ignore the red flags waving in front of your face. Family might be blood, but true loyalty is the only currency that actually matters.